All right, today we are going to be solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So we've already done the quadratic formula, and this is just an alternative to that and factoring. So completing the square uses a few concepts that you have to understand. And right here, this is the first one. So the solve for x. So take a second and see if you can solve for x. Okay, and when you do that, you take the square root. X equals plus or minus 3. So same deal for all of these. If this is a perfect square and this is just a number, we can take the square root and x, we figure out what x is. Remember, the square and the square root cancel themselves out. We can do plus or minus radical 15. And same deal for this. This is a perfect square. It's anything squared. So if I do the square root of both sides, I get x minus 2 equals plus or minus 9, or 3. 3. So when we do that, we actually, this plus or minus, remember, means that there are two possibilities. X minus 2 equals 3 and x minus 2 equals negative 3. So this is one of the concepts that you have to know when you're doing completing the square. And the other one is, what was that, negative 1? And then the other one is knowing that even though it looks like this is a perfect square. If I factor this, this is x plus 5, x plus 5. So that technically is a perfect square. Same deal with this one. If we factor this, x minus 3, x minus 3, that's x minus 3 squared. This is x plus 8, x plus 8, so that's x plus 8 squared. So the pattern I hope you saw in these three is that this number is this number in half, and you square it to get that one. So this is half square, half square, and that's a big concept also with completing the square. So let's get to it. So can you recognize which ones are perfect squares? Now we already know this one is, and this one is. Those are on the other page. What about the rest of them? Take a second and see if you can figure it out. Hopefully you decided that they are all, that should be an all perfect squares. Oh my god, I can't even write. So they're all perfect squares. Circle them all. Okay, remember, even exponents are perfect squares. These are all even, so they're all perfect squares. All these numbers, you know your perfect square. Good to know. Okay, so the procedure that we use, you isolate the terms you isolate the terms with a letter on one side and everything else, and then the number goes on the other. So the letters are over here and the number is there. This is the only time we do that when we solve a quadratic, when we use completing the square. Every other time we always set it equal to 0. Not this one. Okay, so it's letters equal a number. Okay, the x squared term has to be 1. And then we do these things. We divide the middle term by 2, and then we square it. Add that value to both sides, complete the square. Solve the equation, and you always get 2 answers. Okay, so the first thing, the first skill, I guess is the best way to say it, that you need to know is how to make a perfect square. Now, these are the major ones that we're going to be dealing with, but, you know, you can, we'll get to these someday. Okay, so to make this guy a perfect square, we take this number, divide it by 2, okay, and this is how I always do it. I put an x here. I'm going to make this a perfect square. So basically I'm doing 2 steps in one. I have to add something to it to make it a perfect square. What's that number going to be? Well, if I take 8, divide it by 2, I get 4, and 4 squared is 16. So remember, if you were to factor this, it's x plus 4, x plus 4, so that's your perfect square. So that's x plus 4 squared. I'm not going to do this step all the time, but just realize that's kind of how this works. So we just take this number, divide it by 2, it's going to go here. And then we square it, and it goes there. These are quite simple when they're even. And most of the time we will be dealing with just evens. So divide by 2. To get there, we divide by 2. And to get to there, we square it. Oh yeah, that's a square. Okay, this is a little bit more complex, but you get the idea. So it's x plus, we divide it by 2. That's it. And then we square this, so it would be 81 over 4. Divide this by 2. And when we square it, 25 over 4. This is why I like to do the 2 steps at once, because I don't have to worry about trying to factor this guy who looks super nasty. But that's just me. So this one, if I divide this by 2, I get 2 over 6, or 1/3. And then when I square it, I get 4 over 36. Okay, don't worry too much about these. We'll work our way up. Hopefully you understand these guys over here. Okay, so let's solve this. So the big deal is completing the square, and that was the step that we just did previous. But let's talk about this. First thing we have to do is we have to make sure this is on the other side. So we have to move it over. So again, this is the only time we do that with quadratics. And we're going to add something to this side to make it a perfect square. But remember, when we do that, there's the 57. Remember, when we do that, if I add something to this side, I have to add the same thing to this side. So just keep aware of that. Now, when I do this, I like to do both steps, 2 steps at once. Okay, I like to do just like we did on the previous page or on the previous slide, I do like to have it factored already for me. Okay, so all we just do, look at this number, divide it by 2, take this number and square it. Okay, add these two together, and I get 121. So that's the completing the square step. This is now a perfect square. This is the perfect square equal to a number. And now we have to solve it. So hopefully you got that far. After that, we take the square root. X plus 8 equals plus or minus 11. And then this creates our 2 equation. Remember, this plus or minus here. Oops, I just erased. The plus or minus here, right here. Come on, there you go. This means we have 2 equations. So it's x plus 8 equals the positive 11, and x plus 8 equals the negative 11. A lot like absolute value if you think about it, but it's not. So x equals 3, and x equals negative 19. I know it seems like a lot right now. We'll do a couple more examples to kind of get you set, but it's once you get this process, divide by 2 and then square, it's really not hard. Okay, so let's try this one. The letters have to be on one side, so this is a letter. So it has to move over here with the other letter. So we get x squared plus 4x equals negative 5. Okay, I think I'm going to go with this as a typo, and that should be plus here. Okay, so then we do this. We do our, sorry. You have to add something to make it a perfect square. So this, remember I changed this, this is the typo. Sorry. So we have to add something to make it a perfect square. Take this number, divide it by 2, x plus 2. Square it, it goes there. And if I added it to this side, I got to add it to this side also. Yeah. So then we solve this. So that's it. Divide by 2 square. Now we solve by taking the square root. S plus 2 equals plus or minus 3. Divide it, x plus 2 equals 3. X plus 2 equals negative 3. So x is 1. And x is negative 5. Okay, we'll try these two real quick. Why don't you try number 3 on your own, and I'll bring you back with the answer. Okay, so you'll recognize the answer, at least my answer, to look exactly like quadratic formula answers, and that's absolutely what they should look like. Okay, not always do we get answers that work out pretty. So sometimes what we do is we do get the radicals, and they look nice and nasty. So that's good. So remember, you had to move the -4 over. Take this number, divide it by 2. This is a -4, so this is a -2. But when I square this, it's positive. Okay, so positive always gets added to both sides. And then we solve. So the square root of 12 is 2 radical 3. I showed that over here. And then just add 2. Nothing to it. So it's 2, goes right up in front before the plus or minus 2 radical 3. So try this one also. Might have to combine like terms, but you're good for that. Okay, with this one, you had to take that 3x and move it to this side, and the 7 and move it to that side, because the numbers have to be on one side, and the letters have to be on one side and the numbers on the other. So -18 divided by 2 is -9. Square it is 81. That goes there and there. So when you do this, you get 76. 76 breaks up into 4 and 19, so it's 2 radical 19, plus or minus. When it is a radical, you can leave it with the plus or minus thing. If this turns out to be a nice whole number, well, then you're going to have to actually do the math. That's all. All right, have a good weekend.